In this video, I'm going to show you how to get arcade emulation up and running on the Nintendo Wii U using the Final Burn Neo core in Retroarch. Arcade emulation can be a huge pain in the butt for a number of different reasons, one of which being obtaining games. Especially if you like to stick to the legal methods like I do, it really sucks to get games for arcade. And it also sucks just to get them prepared to work on different emulators. Arcade games need to be rebuilt, there's about 70 million different BIOS files needed for each game, and it's just a huge hassle, and I can't stand it. I've never been a fan of arcade emulation. But in the last couple of years, at least arcade emulation has gotten a little bit more accurate and more enjoyable to actually play. And I've actually been pretty fond of the Final Burn Neo core ever since I started using it. So I'm going to show you how to get your arcade games up and running on the Wii U using the Final Burn Neo core today. So let's dive in. The first thing we need to do to get arcade emulation up and running is source arcade games. Like I said, this really sucks. If you own arcade PCBs, there are methods of hardware dumping it. It is very difficult. Ugh, it sucks. It just sucks. That's all there is to say. Like, it just sucks. But thankfully, there are arcade compilations out there that do use MAME-style ROMs. And there are also the arcade 1-up cabinets, which are a lot easier to dump their ROMs from. So that's a couple of the legal ways to get your arcade games. Otherwise, of course, you can resort to the shady part of the net, and then you don't really have to worry about it, I suppose. Regardless of how you obtain your games, there is a bit of setup required to get them to work on Final Burn Neo, because again, arcade games aren't just plug and play. You need to make sure they are the right ROM set, otherwise they might not work at all. So we're going to need a couple of things to get this to work, the first of which is CLR MAME Pro. We need to download the latest version of this. So there is a zip version or an executable version if you want to install it. I prefer the zip version, and I am running a 64-bit Windows operating system, so I'm going to download this version. The second thing we're going to need is the Final Burn Neo .dat file, and you can get this from the Final Burn Neo libretro GitHub page. There will be links to both of these pages in the description below, so you can grab them from those links. But we are looking for the Final Burn Neo CLR MAME Pro XML arcade only.dat file. And we are just going to click download. Now, it might open up a just giant page of XML data like this. So if that happens to you, just go back a page, and then right-click, Save Link As, and it'll ask you to save it as a .dat file. There we go. Now there is one more optional file we could grab if you want it, and that is the HighScores.dat file. So if you want to play your arcade games and save high scores to compete against yourself, you can download that, add it to your Retroarch system folder, and that is how that's done. So this file is housed on the Retroarch docs page. I'll have a link in the description below, but basically you just need to right-click on the HighScore.dat, save link as, and then save it to your desktop. But now that we got these downloaded, I'm just going to get CLR MAME Pro extracted real quick. So with 7-zip, it's as easy as telling it to extract it. Woohoo! Now for my arcade games, I put them in a folder that was named Needs Fixing because I need to make sure that they're going to work with Final Burn Neo, so I put them in a folder that says Needs Fixing. I'm going to make a new folder now, and I'm going to name it Arcade Games. And this is where the final versions of my arcade games are going to end up when I am done with CLR MAME Pro. Now there is one more folder that we need. It doesn't need to be named anything. You can just make a folder, leave it as like new folder, doesn't matter. But now I'm going to open up CLR MAME Pro, so I'm just going to open up the folder and launch the program. And it's telling us the steps that we need to do to like kind of use it, which is fine. Just click OK. And now we need that Final Burn Neo .dat file that we just downloaded. It's going to be very simple. We're just going to drag it into CLR MAME Pro. It's going to ask us where we want to put it. Profiles is good, so press OK. And now it's going to show up here in this little window. So we're just going to right-click on it and tell it to load the profile. And when it asks you about the settings, just click on Default here. And you might get something about .dat files being wrong. Tell it OK to all. And then just keep telling it OK to all as it goes. It's fine. Now, once you get to this CLR MAME Pro main menu type thing here, we're going to go into Settings. We're going to set up some directories. So for the ROM path, we're going to click Add. And this is where we're going to add our output folder of arcade games. So this is where our games are going to go once they're fixed. Arcade games. And now we're going to click on the little drop down box here. And we're going to click on sample path. And this is where we're going to add that new folder that we didn't really need. So there we go. New folder 2. Done. And once you have both of those set, just go ahead and exit out of that menu. And now we're going to go to Scanner. We're going to set up some things in here, and then we're going to go back into the Rebuilder and set up some things in there. So let's just start with Scanner first. Now, for arcade games to work in Retroarch, they need to be non-merged sets. So we want to select non-merged set here. And then for the fix, we want to make sure that we are getting the names, unneeded files, name, size, and date, that all of these are selected as fixed. Don't select missing, it'll just give you a big headache. Don't choose that one. Now the next thing we need to tick is in the advanced tab. So go in here and uncheck the separate BIOS set file. This way all of our games will work independently and they don't need to have any separate BIOS files in the RetroArch system folder. They will just be plug and play after we rebuild them. But once you have that unchecked, we can exit out of there. And then down in the bottom right-hand corner of the scanner, there's a little bubble down here. So it says Jump to Rebuilder, so click on that. And then for the merged options, make sure that non-merged sets is checked again. And under Advanced, make sure that Separate BIOS Sets is unchecked again. Once you have that unchecked, go ahead and exit out. And now we're going to select our Needs Fixing folder as our source folder. And we're going to tell it to rebuild the set as a non-merged set. So click Rebuild. And this will take a while depending on how many games you have. I only have 4 arcade games, so this isn't going to take very long for my example, but be patient with it. It will do its job. It just might take a while. And once the rebuilder is finished, you will be greeted with a output thing that looks like this. My scan took about 4 minutes for 4 games. Again, if you have a lot of games, this will take much longer. But now that it's finished, I could just press OK right here. And I'm going to open up both my original Needs Fixing folder and Arcade Games folders now. So in my original Needs Fixing folder, I had 4 games. And in my Arcade Games folder, you will see that it has made way more than 4 games. Arcade game BIOS files and different types of program files were used for multiple games, so as you're doing the rebuilding, it is putting those BIOS files into folders for each individual game that would use them. That's just part of the non-merged set stuff, so what I'm going to do in my Arcade Games folder now is delete everything but the original game that I was trying to get in the first place. So like everything from here to 1942. Gonna delete it. Everything from 1942 to Marvel vs. Capcom, I'm going to delete it. Like, these are not gonna work. They're not real games. They're just a couple of BIOS files. So I'm just gonna delete them. And then same thing. Everything from Marvel vs. Capcom all the way down to Street Fighter. Goodbye. And then everything from Street Fighter to Turtles. Sayonara. And then everything after Turtles, it's gone. There we go. So now I have the games in my Arcade Games folder matching the folders that were put in. So there we go. We can close the Needs Fixing folder. We don't need it anymore. I'm going to minimize the Arcade Games folder. But now we're going to jump back into CLRMain Pro to make sure that these games are going to work in our version of Final Burn Neo. So down in the bottom of the program here, we're going to jump to the scanner. And if you were listening to what I said before, everything's already ready to go. We're just going to hit Start New Scan. And it's going to scan our Arcade Games folder and let us know if our games are going to work or not. Again, this will take a while, so just be patient with it. And once the scan completes, you'll have another statistics screen here. Just press OK on that. Now from here, we need to make a list of the games that we have to see if they're going to show up in Final Burn Neo correctly. So just click on this Have List option down here. And save it to like your desktop or something. And it will generate your Have List. And then it'll ask if you want to view the created list now, so select yes. And it will tell you which games it was able to find. So again, in my arcade games folder, I had 1942, Marvel vs. Capcom, Street Fighter 2, and TMNT 2. And sure enough, it was able to find 1942, Marvel vs. Capcom, Street Fighter 2, and TMNT 2. If your games don't show up in the have list, that means they will not work. They need to show up in your have list for any chance of them to work in Final Burn Neo. So the nice thing about it is that you are able to go through and look at the set information. Make this a bit bigger here. And you could scroll up to a game that you think you have, and it will tell you if you have the file or not. So if they're all white like this, that means that you have the full file. But if one of these is in red for whatever reason, like we'll just click on Time Force here, like they're all red, they are missing. Those are files that are missing. So you can click on the game that you own, and if you don't have a file, it will show up in red. That way you'll know what you need to find to fix it. So pretty convenient, all things considered. But that have list is really going to be a lifesaver. It'll let you know if your games are going to work or not. But once you have your games rebuilt, they show up in your have list, we're ready to put them on our Wii U SD card. So I'm just going to close out of CLR Main Pro. We don't need it anymore. I'm going to close my arcade game folder. And I'm going to close that folder. So now I just need to put my arcade games folder onto my Wii U SD card. So I have a folder on my Wii U SD card named Retroarch ROMs. Going to open that up and drag it in. And now that I've got my arcade games folder placed, I'm going to add the HighScore.dat file to my RetroArch system folder. So I'm just going to go back up to the root of my SD card, go into the RetroArch folder, course folder, system folder, and now I'm going to make a folder named FB Neo. And I'm going to drag my HighScore.dat file into that folder. And there we go. But after that long process is finished, we're finally ready to boot up our Wii U and get loaded into RetroArch. So just go ahead and take your SD card out of your computer, put it back in the Wii U, and let's get started. Now, just as a quick reminder, this guide is a continuation of my original Wii U RetroArch install video, so please refer back to that video for RetroArch install help, settings, and how to install this forwarder channel you see here on my home screen. But now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and boot into RetroArch using either the Homebrew Launcher or the forwarder channel. Once RetroArch is loaded, we are ready to begin loading up our arcade games. So to do this, you need to go down to Load Core, and we're going to choose Arcade Final Burn Neo Core. Once the core is loaded, we are ready to begin loading the games. So to do so, go down to Load Content, navigate to your SD card, and find where you stored your games. So for me, again, it was in RetroArch ROMs, arcade games. And then you could just choose a game, tell it to load the archive, and choose the current core to get it to run. I really don't like this method. I think it is slow and obnoxious. So instead, what I like to do is make a games playlist. So you can back out to the RetroArch main menu, go down to Import Content, and from here we're going to do a manual scan. Now select the content directory where you have your arcade games stored. So again, mine are in SD card, RetroArch ROMs, arcade games, and then tell it to scan the directory once you get there. System name, we're going to choose Final Burn Neo. There we go. And then for the default core, we're going to choose Final Burn Neo. So Arcade, Final Burn Neo. Now make sure Scan Recursively is set to on if you have your game separated into subfolders, and make sure Scan Inside Archives is off. And once you have these options set, we're going to go ahead and start the scan. And once your scan is complete, there'll be a new Arcade Games entry down here on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And there we go. But now that we've got the playlist made, we could just go over, select a game, press A on it, and press A again to tell it to run. And there we go, we have arcade emulation up and running on the Nintendo Wii U. So for those of you looking to get arcade emulation up and running, those are the required steps to do so. You've got to get your ROM set rebuilt for the current version of the arcade emulator that you're using. Get them copied over to your Wii U SD card. Make that games playlist to make your life a heck of a lot easier. And then you can begin playing. Now, of course, there is a lot more to arcade emulation than that. If you want to have the full experience, arcade games would use dip switches and other such devices to adjust game settings. So for example, on Marvel vs. Capcom here, if you hold down the start button, it will bring you into the test menu. And from here you could change all kinds of things like sound and voice. You could do a color check. And then of course the configuration data. So for example, if you go into the system, you could turn on coins, you could turn off coins. Continues on or off, monitor, normal or flip. Sound, language. And then also you can change the game difficulty and other such things. And then you can save and exit. But there we go. Now when I try to play Marvel vs. Capcom, you don't need a coin to play it. So you don't have to press the select button. Just one less step, I guess. But it's still neat. It's a neat feature to have. I like it. Of course, that's just for Marvel vs. Capcom and other games that support a test menu like that. Other ones will actually have the dip switches built into the Retroarch quick menu options here. And they'll be down at the bottom, but we don't have that option with Marvel vs. Capcom because you just hold the start for this one. But there'll be a ton more options down here that will have all of those types of settings in them for you. But I think that's the most important part of arcade emulation is knowing how to get to those dip switches because it really lets you change things around, make arcade games a little more enjoyable. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the core options available to us within Final Burn Neo besides the test menu. So going back into our Retroarch quick menu with the Wii U home button, scroll down to options, and our first one is to use 32-bit color depth when available. Leave this one on, it will give you better colors. Our next option is to rotate the screen for vertical shooter games or other games that used a vertical display. So if you turn it on, it will rotate the screen 90 degrees to the left. If you use alternate, it will rotate the screen 90 degrees to the right, or you can turn it off. Our next option is frame skip. I don't think most games will need this, as the Wii U is powerful enough to run most of these arcade games. If you encounter a game that is lagging, you could try enabling frame skip or leave it set to auto. Then you could choose the frame skip threshold. Again, I don't think these are really going to be needed for the vast majority of things. Again, I only have 4 arcade games, but they all seem to work really well. The next option can also help with performance. If there is a game that you are experiencing like emulator lag on, you could try decreasing the emulated CPU speed. You will lose out on FPS, but the game will run at full speed, so it's an interesting trade-off. Alternatively, you can use this feature to overclock your emulated games. So if there is a game that has hardware-induced lag as part of its emulation, you can overclock the emulated CPU to try to overcome that. Do note that this can produce unwanted results if the Wii U CPU can't handle the overclock, so be careful with that. I myself leave it just set to 100%. The next option is for high scores. This was for that DAT file that we placed earlier. So if you want high scores on or off, you can enable that here. The next option is for allow patched ROM sets. So if you like to have ROM hacks or something, those go into your system folder, Final Burn Neo folder, patched folder, and then it will overload the current ROM with that hack. So I'm not too familiar with this stuff, but for those of you that are, here's the option for that. Next, we could choose our sample rate. It's already set to the highest by default, so if you want to lower the audio quality, you could do so here. Next, we have some audio options. The first is sample interpolation, and the second is FM interpolation. I'm not the biggest audiophile, so I'm not too sure what the difference between 2-point first order and 4-point third order is, or you could turn them off entirely. Up to you. Next, we have analog speed, and this is set to 100% by default. The footnote here says that some games do require the value to be set lower, so if you have a game that just seems completely unplayable with input, you could try lowering this and see what happens. Our next option is no crosshair with light gun device. So if you want to play a light gun game, I believe you can on the Wii U using the touchpad. I don't have any light gun arcade games, so I can't really say one way or another if this works or not. And then of course the last option is to choose the hotkey for that diagnostic input. I like it on hold start, but you can also choose between a number of different options. But that's really going to cover it as far as core options are concerned. There are going to be a number of arcade games that will have their own selection of dip switches for you to choose difficulties and things like that, and that will appear on a game-by-game basis. But once you have these options set for particular games, I do recommend doing these ones on a game-by-game basis. You can create a game options file by pressing A at the top of the game options file screen here, where it says create game options file. Because there might be some you want frame skip on, other ones you might not, so definitely recommend doing this on a game-by-game basis. Now, normally in this part of the video, I would go over shaders, but Wii U video shaders are very strange, so I'm going to make a dedicated shader video once we finish up these core videos, so stay tuned for that. But I think that covers the basics of arcade emulation through Final Burn Neo. As always, if you happen to have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section below, and I will do my best to try to help you out. Again, arcade emulation could be a real pain in the butt, so don't hesitate to ask. But now if you could all do me a huge favor, and be sure to hit that like or dislike button, just depending on how much you like today's tutorial. And if you haven't done so already, hit that sub button so you can see when new videos just like this go live. It goes a long way to helping out the channel, and I am so grateful to all of you for that. We are getting very close. We are getting so close to this channel being self-sustaining, and I can't thank you all enough for that. If you're feeling particularly generous and want to see the channel expand further, you can always check out that join button here on YouTube or click on the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. A little goes a long way to keeping this place running, and we are just super grateful to all of you for that. Our current champions who have been with us for a while, thank you all so much. You are all freaking amazing. But that's going to do it for this one, so until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, stay awesome, and we will see you all back next video.